There are Pokemon out there that are rare enough that not many people ever see them, and only high-profile trainers are able to get a hold of them. Then there are those out there that are so rare as to be near legends. We know they exist, but they only get spotted maybe once every few years. And then there are those that are so common that they scare the crap out of you in your basement at 3 AM when you're just trying to clean Booster's puppy bed and they've made a nest out of cardboard and old shoes in the corner. Welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, and today we will be going over what could possibly be the most common Pokemon in the Kanto region, Rattata and its evolution Raticate. For those in the few regions where Rattata are not everywhere, a Rattata is a small, foot-long rodent Pokemon averaging around 8 pounds, with purple fur, large incisor teeth, and a tail that curls in on itself at the end. Raticate is significantly larger and heavier, being 2 feet long and weighing usually around 41 pounds. Raticate changed out the purple fur for a yellow sandy colored fur and a long furless tail. As I'm sure you can imagine based on my description before, Rattata is another Pokemon that is considered a pest. They can live just about anywhere, and they will, getting into people's homes and new environments very easily. They also multiply very quickly, whole populations exploding into massive size in weeks. Those two things combined are the reason they are so common wherever they are introduced. Before we begin, a small disclaimer. The Rattata line is the first Pokemon we're going to be going over that has a regional variation in another region. In the Alola region, Raticate and Rattata have both adapted to the new environment, changing in both body and type from their Cantonian counterparts. As a lot of regional variants are so different from each other that they could pretty much be different Pokemon species altogether, regional variants will get their own videos when I start going into the Pokemon from that region. So, Alolan regional variations will be covered when I get to Alola, and the same will happen with Galarian and Paldean variations. It'll just prevent these guides from becoming way too long and confusing, trying to cover 2 different kinds of Pokemon with different types and living conditions, while calling them the same things. Knowing that, let's get into how to care for these small rodent Pokemon, and figure out if these Pokemon are the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. As I said in the intro, these Pokemon could really live anywhere as long as there's food and water. So, while you might not find them in extreme places like the desert or a side of a volcano, places like forests, fields, or even towns and cities are perfect environments for them to flourish. But I highly doubt, and would really not recommend, you'll want to just let your Rattata roam around your house like that, building a nest somewhere in your walls. That's how you end up having electrical problems and getting bit. So you'll need an enclosure, and with the relatively small size of this Pokemon's line, your enclosure could fit inside your house with little difficulty. Kinda like Pidgey or Caterpie, you could just put the enclosure in a corner of the room and have it not take up too much space. 2 things that you'll need to keep in mind when choosing your enclosure for your Rattata and Raticate are the size of the enclosure and the decorations inside it. Space is an important thing in your Pokemon's enclosure because these Pokemon are very mobile and active. You'll need room for it to wander around the bottom of the cage and vertical height, as plenty of the mouse Pokemon, Rattata included, love to climb. Most enclosures that you can get that are made for rodent Pokemon have metal bars for the sides, which provide perfect handholds for them. Another good thing to keep in mind, there's no such thing as too much space for this species. So you could get your Rattata an enclosure that's built for Raticate, and never have to worry about it again. but I understand the need for space or to save money. The average length for a Rattata is 1 foot long, so the best dimensions will be at least 2 feet by 2 feet on the bottom and 3 feet tall. Plenty of room for them to move around on the base and climb up to the top. You can even get ones that have built-in platforms and ramps, so your Pokemon can run up them and get more space out of its enclosure. Or, if you want, you could get an enclosure without the built-in platforms, and then get cloth platforms, almost like hammocks, that you could attach to the sides and then hang down over the enclosure. These would function the same as built-in platforms, allowing your Pokemon to utilize the vertical space of their enclosure. With those though, you'll need to keep an eye on them, as your Pokemon may start to chew on them, leading to damage or even ripping through the straps holding up the hammock. Moving on to Raticate, it will need more space than Rattata, pretty much double, with its enclosure being 4 feet squared on the bottom and about 5 feet tall. Same with Rattata, you can get one with different platforms, or install the cloth hammocks that will act as more space for your Pokemon to move around. Whether you go for the smaller enclosure for your Rattata, or just go straight for the larger one, you can get both online or at most Pokemon care shops. They aren't too hard to find usually. An important part of a Rattata or Raticate's enclosure is going to be the decorations, in large part because of their teeth. Those front 2 teeth of these Pokemon, the large intimidating looking incisors, will never stop growing. From the beginning of its life to the end, these teeth will always grow and extend. This is because those teeth are the main way that a Rattata in the wild defend themselves from predators and to get rid of rivals in their territory. While doing so, their teeth will often break or chip, so they have developed teeth that will always grow to replace the broken bits. As these guides are more for the people who are going to be keeping their Pokemon in their homes and not battling with them, your Pokemon won't be breaking or chipping their teeth often enough to keep them under control. This can lead to their teeth becoming too long for their mouths and can cause damage and health problems. To prevent that, you'll need to give them something hard to chew on. You can get hard chewable treats from the Pokemon shops that would help with this. You could also get a wooden toy that is specifically made for these kinds of situations. Or you could use what they use in the wild and give them a small log. Just be sure to get a few of them to provide stimulation and variation to your Pokemon. Either way, they will spend much of their time chewing on those objects and wearing down their teeth. A few other things to consider for their enclosure will be a wall-mounted water spigot and a heavy ceramic dish on the floor of their enclosure where you'll put the food when you feed them. Both very important items, but easy enough to get a hold of. When looking at Pokemon that will interact well with the Rattata line, a good thing to keep in mind is that both Rattata and Raticate are prey Pokemon to a lot of different types of Pokemon. Almost all flying types and plenty of the other types can consider Rattata and Raticate prey if they're strong enough to handle it. So, any fully evolved predators, I would keep away from your Rattata line unless they are very well trained. Other Rattata evolutions are a fantastic choice to house together. After all, they naturally form packs in the wild, and they are a very social animal. After all, they naturally form packs in the wild, and they are a very social Pokemon. Just keep in mind that if you have one Pokemon of each gender housed together and they aren't fixed, you are going to end up with more Rattata after a very short time. There is a reason they are so common, and it's because their populations can explode quicker than most. So if you don't want baby Rattata, then be sure to either get your Pokemon spayed or neutered, or go with 2 of the same gender. And if you plan on housing more than one Rattata and Raticate in the same enclosure, just remember to increase the size of the enclosure. I only gave specifications for one Pokemon. Availability. If you haven't gathered from the intro, the Rattata line is in the category of so common that it's become what many consider to be a pest. They can survive in so many environments and their populations grow so quickly that it's very easy to see one in the wild. And if you heard the air quotes that I just put around those words, that's because you don't even need to head out into the woods or out of your town probably to find one. I'm sure you can just ask around your town or take a nighttime stroll near any empty house or park in your neighborhood, and you can find a place where you can catch your own Rattata. I would just advise caution, because these Pokemon, while not terribly dangerous on their own, live in such large communities that they can become a danger just by sheer numbers. But the good news is that if you don't want to go out and try to catch your own Rattata or Raticate, then there are many breeders out there who are willing to sell them. After all, Rattata is one of the most common feeders that are used by breeders, and many of us have our own colonies of Rattata that we use as feeders for the other Pokemon that we raise and sell. So even if they don't have Rattata listed as a Pokemon that they actually sell, just ask them. They may have their own colony and might be willing to sell you one or two if you ask nicely. But my point is that if you want a Rattata or even a Raticate, just looking up your nearest breeder or walking around your town in the right spots could be all you need to do. Care. A good mix of foods for your Rattata evolution will be a mix of chesto berries and kelpsie berries, as they will provide a good amount of protein and fiber for your Pokemon's diet. Then mix in some slices of some other berries as well to vary their diet every now and then, and to bolster your Pokemon's immune system. Personally, I would mix in spellin and corn berries when they're younger, and when your Pokemon gets older and reaches a point where they start to slow down growing, I would swap out the corn berries for the Wapare berries. Those are the berries that I use to feed my Pokemon usually, but if you get your Pokemon from a breeder, check with them to see what they've been feeding their Pokemon. Their diet might be a bit different than mine. As for the amount to feed them, the few people in the breeding community that I've talked to that raise their own Rattata colonies said that they don't really have an exact measurement that they give their Pokemon, but the general rule of thumb that they told me was roughly a handful of sliced berries per Rattata. For when it evolves into a Raticate, you'll up that to 2 handfuls of the same berries, all sliced. All of these feedings will be once a day, and as the Rattata line are crepuscular, or most active at dawn and dusk, those are the best times to feed them. Either of those times will be fine for feedings, so long as you stay regular with it. This will make sure to regulate their sleep schedule around feeding time. As for cleaning, contrary to popular opinion, the Rattata line are actually very clean Pokemon. They have a bad reputation for being dirty because of how they can be found a lot of times in places people consider dirty, like sewers or in dumps. But a Rattata that's raised in captivity is really quite clean. There are the basic things that you'll have to do, just like with all the other Pokemon. You'll need to clean the enclosure, like washing out the food bowl, changing the waters, and changing out the dirty newspaper from the bottom of the enclosure with a new one. You'll also need to clip their nails as well. You can just use a human nail clipper for this, but try not to clip the pink part of the nail. That's what's known as the quick, and it will start to bleed if you clip it. If you do happen to clip it, don't worry, it's a minor injury. Just apply some cornstarch to the nail and that'll help it clot and seal up quickly. The last thing for their care is the enrichment and socialization that these Pokemon will need. This can actually be handled by doing a few different things. One is to get them a good assortment of toys and interactable objects in their enclosure. Rattata and Raticate are actually pretty intelligent Pokemon, and can easily become bored with just an empty enclosure, which can lead to them developing destructive behavioral habits, like chewing on the side of their enclosure. A good amount of toys will give them something to keep their attention on, and you should every now and then change those toys out for new ones. That way they don't end up becoming bored with those toys in particular. Another way to deal with your Pokemon's boredom is to just play with them. Both of the Rattata line are highly interactive and playful with those that they formed a bond with. Doing this will reinforce that bond and give your Pokemon a chance to get out of its enclosure and explore a little bit. For those that are worried about getting bit, as long as the Pokemon is used to you and you don't scare it, then you shouldn't have anything to worry about. Just when you pick them up, make sure that you don't try to pick them up from the top. It makes them feel like they're under attack from a predator when you do this. Instead, do a sort of scooping motion so you can kind of pick them up from the belly. It'll avoid scaring them. Cost. Thanks to the widespread availability of these Pokemon, you should not be paying more than the very low category for them. In fact, they are so relevant in the breeding industry that it might be cheaper to get one through a breeder than to buy a Pokeball and go out and catch one. It would certainly be less work. So if someone is trying to sell you a Rattata or a Raticate for anything that is beyond the very low category, then I'm sorry to say they're overcharging you. Unless it's a shiny. That'll definitely cost more. Depending on what size you decide to get, their enclosure could cost you between the low and the high category, depending on the brand that you decide to buy and what decorations and toys you get for your Pokemon. If you get the Raticate enclosure from the start and decide to buy a lot of high-end and big brand decorations, then that could take you into the high category. But at a minimum, on a budget, you could end up only spending in the upper low category. The food is something that won't cost you much either. Due to the fact that you're only giving them a handful of food a day and the fact that they eat berries instead of meat, you could mitigate these costs in a few ways. Either you could grow your own, which, depending on where you live and what the climate and weather is like, could cover some or all of your costs. Or you could order the fruit frozen from online, in bulk if you can, and that should only bring your expenses up to the bottom end of the moderate category. Taking all of these expenses together, Rattata and Raticate might just be the cheapest Pokemon that we've covered so far. Conclusion. Taken as a whole, the Rattata line of Pokemon are great Pokemon to have. They're small compared to a lot of other Pokemon out there, they can be kept in the house, and they don't take a lot of food or effort to take care of. If you're a parent looking for a first Pokemon for your young kid, someone living in an apartment working with limited space, or even someone who just wants an easy Pokemon to care for, I would highly recommend getting a Rattata or a Raticate. Though I don't care for them myself, plenty of breeders praise these Pokemon for how easy they are to care for. After all, there is a reason that a lot of beginning trainers use Rattata and eventually Raticate. Out of all the Pokemon that we've covered so far in this series, Rattata may just be the most accessible Pokemon by far, and could possibly keep that title for a while now. Thank you all for listening. And please join us next time when we go over the other common Kanto bird Pokemon, Spearow and its evolution Fearow. Have a wonderful night, everyone.